I never thought a simple LinkedIn notification would destroy my life. But as I sat in my cubicle that Tuesday morning, watching my boss Marcus stride across the office floor with fury in his eyes, I knew my carefully constructed world was about to crumble. For 8 months, I had been living a double life. By day, I was David Chen, the dedicated marketing analyst at Morrison & Associates, arriving early, staying late, and earning praise for my innovative campaigns. By night and weekends, I was also David Chen, the freelance digital consultant running my own growing business from my home office. What started as a side hustle to pay off student loans had evolved into something much bigger, something that now generated more income than my day job. The irony wasn't lost on me. The skills I honed during my 9 to 5 were making me successful in my after-hours venture. Every presentation I gave at Morrison, every client strategy one developed, was essentially training for my real passion. But Morrison's employee handbook was crystal clear about outside employment. It required written approval from management. And Marcus, well, Marcus wasn't the approving type. I had justified my silence in a dozen ways. I wasn't competing with Morrison's clients. I was working different hours. I was actually becoming a better employee because of the diverse experience. But deep down, I knew I was walking a tightrope, and today, I had finally fallen. The notification that sealed my fate was innocent enough. A client had tagged me in a LinkedIn post celebrating the success of a campaign I had designed for them. Huge thanks to David Chen for the brilliant strategy that increased our conversion rate by 340%. The post had gained traction quickly, accumulating likes and comments from industry professionals who knew both versions of me. Marcus had seen it during his morning social media check, a routine he performed religiously to monitor the company's online presence and, more importantly, to keep tabs on his employees' digital footprints. I watched his face change as he read the post, then saw him frantically scrolling through my LinkedIn profile, discovering months of achievements I had never mentioned in our weekly one-on-ones. The walk from his corner office to my desk felt like a funeral march. Other employees pretended to focus on their screens, but I could feel their peripheral attention as Marcus approached. His usually pristine appearance seemed disheveled, his tie slightly askew, his face flushed with what I would soon learn was pure rage. Conference room. Now. His voice was barely controlled, each word precise and sharp. As I followed him down the hallway, my mind raced through potential explanations, apologies, and damage control strategies. Maybe I could convince him that this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe I could emphasize how my outside work was actually benefiting Morrison through the skills I was developing. Maybe I could promise to wind down the consulting business gradually. But when Marcus slammed his hand down on the conference room table with such force that my coffee mug jumped, I realized that reason had already left the building. The sound of Marcus's palm hitting the mahogany table reverberated through the conference room like a gunshot. The framed photos of Morrison's Employee of the Month winners rattled against the wall, and I swear I saw dust particles dance in the fluorescent light from the impact. 8 months. His voice cracked with fury. 8 months you've been lying to my face. I had seen Marcus angry before. Deadlines missed, clients lost, presentations botched, but this was different. This was personal betrayal in his eyes, and I could see veins bulging in his neck as he towered over me. His usually immaculate silver hair was disheveled, and his hands were shaking with rage. Marcus, I can explain. Explain. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to explain how you've been moonlighting as a consultant while collecting a full-time salary from me? You want to explain how you've been using company time, company resources, and company-trained skills to build your own empire? The accusation about company resources hit me like a physical blow because it wasn't entirely untrue. I had used Morrison's market research databases for background information on potential clients. I had taken calls during lunch breaks. I had even used the office printer for a few client proposals, small infractions that now felt enormous under his withering glare. I never competed with Morrison's clients, I said weakly, knowing how pathetic it sounded. Don't. His fist came down again, and this time a pen holder toppled over, sending ballpoint pens scattering across the table. Don't you dare try to minimize this. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't know what you've been doing? He pulled out his phone and began reading from my LinkedIn profile with theatrical disgust. Digital strategy expert with over 50 successful campaigns, specializing in conversion optimization and customer acquisition. Available for consultation and project-based work. He looked up at me with contempt. This profile has more accomplishments listed than your annual review. The worst part was that he was right. My consulting portfolio had grown beyond my wildest expectations. What started as helping a friend's startup had mushroomed into a roster of 12 regular clients and a waiting list of potential projects. I was making twice my Morrison salary, working on cutting-edge campaigns that Morrison's conservative approach would never attempt. You know what the real insult is? Marcus continued, beginning to pace like a caged animal. I've been bragging about you. To my wife, to other department heads, to the regional director. Look at David, I said. Look at his innovation, his dedication, his fresh ideas. And all this time, you were practicing on us. That accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth I didn't want to acknowledge. My best ideas at Morrison were often refined versions of strategies I had tested with my consulting clients. The success I was having in both worlds was interconnected in ways that made my deception feel even more complicated. I was going to promote you, he said quietly, and for a moment, his anger gave way to something that looked like genuine hurt. The senior analyst position. I was going to announce it next week at the quarterly meeting. My heart sank. The promotion I had been hoping for, the recognition I thought I deserved, had been within reach. But instead of feeling regret, I felt something unexpected, relief. The weight of living two lives had been crushing me slowly, and as painful as this moment was, there was something liberating about the truth finally being exposed. Marcus, my consulting work has made me a better employee. Every skill I've developed, every technique I've learned, has been stolen from this company. His voice rose to a shout. Every client meeting you sat in on, every strategy session, every piece of training we invested in you, you've been selling it to the highest bidder. The conference room door was glass, and I could see other employees gathering in the hallway, pretending to have conversations while obviously straining to hear our confrontation. Sarah from accounting kept glancing over, and Jake from IT had abandoned any pretense of walking by, simply standing there with his mouth slightly open. "Clean out your desk," Marcus said suddenly, his voice dropping to an icy whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. "You have 15 minutes. Security will escort you out." The finality in his voice made my knees weak. This was really happening. 8 months of careful balance, of managing 2 professional identities, of building something I was proud of. All of it was crashing down in this sterile conference room that smelled of stale coffee and disappointment. But as I stood up to leave, something inside me shifted. The fear and regret I expected to feel were being replaced by something else entirely. A growing realization that maybe this wasn't the disaster I thought it was. The 15 minutes Marcus gave me to clean out my desk felt both eternal and impossibly brief. As I walked back to my cubicle, followed by Tom from security, a kind man in his 60s who looked more embarrassed than I felt. Every step echoed in the suddenly quiet office. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence, keyboards had gone silent, and even the perpetually humming printer seemed to have paused out of respect for my public humiliation. My cubicle, which had been my professional home for 3 years, now looked pathetically small and impersonal. The motivational posters I had hung up seemed to mock me. "Success is where preparation meets opportunity," read one. Well, I had certainly prepared, and opportunity had definitely met me, just not in the way I had expected. Sarah approached tentatively as I began emptying my desk drawers. We had shared countless lunch breaks and office gossip sessions, and her confused expression made it clear that Marcus's explosion had been heard throughout the office. "David, what happened?" "We heard shouting," she whispered, glancing nervously at Tom, who was pretending to examine his fingernails while obviously monitoring my every move. I couldn't bring myself to explain the whole truth, not here, not with half the office listening. I had a side business Marcus didn't know about, I said simply, tossing my collection of stress balls into a cardboard box. It's against company policy. Her eyes widened. A business? Like, a real business. The way she said it, with a mixture of shock and something that might have been admiration, made me pause. Until this moment, I had been thinking of my consulting work as a transgression, a betrayal, a mistake that had cost me everything. But hearing it described as a real business, by someone else suddenly reframed everything. Because it was real. Over the past 8 months, I had built something from nothing. I had acquired clients through skill and reputation, not corporate connections or inherited accounts. I had solved problems, increased revenues, and built lasting professional relationships. Every success in my consulting portfolio was earned through merit, creativity, and results. Jake wandered over, abandoning any pretense of subtlety. Dude, you had your own business? That's actually pretty cool. Not cool enough to keep my job, I replied, but for the first time since Marcus's explosion, I found myself almost smiling. Are you kidding? Jake lowered his voice conspiratorially. Half the people here would kill to have the guts to start something on their own. We all talk about it. Someday I'll start my own thing, someday I'll be my own boss, but you actually did it. As I packed up my personal items, family photos, a small plant my sister had given me, my collection of industry magazines, I started doing the math in my head. My consulting income had exceeded my Morrison salary for the past 3 months. I had enough saved to cover my expenses for at least 6 months, possibly longer if I was careful. More importantly, I had a client roster that was actively generating revenue and a reputation in the digital marketing community that had been growing steadily. Tom cleared his throat gently. I hate to rush you, son, but we're approaching the 15-minute mark. I nodded and took one last look around the office. The fluorescent lights that had given me headaches during long afternoons, the beige walls that had made me feel like I was working in a cardboard box, the constant background noise of office politics and interdepartmental rivalries. Suddenly, none of it seemed as appealing as it had when I arrived this morning. Marcus emerged from his office as I approached the elevator, carrying my single box of personal belongings. Our eyes met across the office floor, and I expected to see continued anger or perhaps smugness. Instead, I saw something I hadn't anticipated: uncertainty. For just a moment, he looked less like the powerful executive who had just fired an employee and more like someone who was wondering if he had made the right decision. The elevator doors opened with their familiar ding, and as I stepped inside with Tom, I realized something profound was happening. The career I had been so afraid of losing, the job I had thought defined my professional worth, the security I had risked everything to maintain, none of it felt as essential as it had an hour ago. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, carrying me away from Morrison and Associates forever, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I was about to discover. The real question wasn't how I would survive without Morrison. The question was why I had waited so long to find out if I could thrive without it. The parking garage beneath Morrison and Associates had always felt like a concrete tomb, but as I loaded my single cardboard box into the trunk of my Honda Civic, it felt more like a launch pad. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the echo of my footsteps seemed different somehow, lighter, more purposeful. I sat in my car for a moment, engine running, air conditioning battling the August heat, and pulled out my phone. 17 missed calls. 23 text messages. 47 LinkedIn notifications. Word of my dramatic exit had apparently traveled faster than Morrison's usually sluggish internal communication network. The first call was from Jennifer Martinez, the CEO of a startup I had been consulting with for 4 months. Her company's user acquisition had increased by 280% since we started working together, and she had become one of my strongest advocates. David, I just heard through the grapevine what happened at Morrison, her voicemail began. First of all, I'm sorry you had to go through that. Second, I have a proposition for you. Call me back as soon as you get this. We've been talking about bringing on a full-time growth strategist, and after what you've accomplished for us, I can't think of anyone else we'd want for the position. The salary would be competitive with what you were making, plus equity, plus you'd have complete autonomy to consult on the side. Actually, we'd encourage it. the diverse experience makes you better at what you do. I stared at my phone screen, reading the transcript of her voicemail twice to make sure I had understood correctly. A job offer. Within 2 hours of being fired. From a company that not only accepted my consulting work but actively encouraged it. The next message was from Robert Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, a venture capitalist I had met through a client networking event. David, heard you're now available full-time. I've got 3 portfolio companies that need exactly what you do. Are you interested in discussing a consulting arrangement that would have you working with all 3? We're talking about a retainer that would be, well, let's just say it would be significantly more than most people make in traditional employment. Message after message revealed the same pattern. Clients I had worked with part-time were eager to increase our engagement. Industry contacts were reaching out with opportunities. Even competitors were expressing interest in having conversations about potential collaboration. But the message that stopped me cold was from Marcus himself, sent just 20 minutes after I had left the building. David, I've had some time to cool down and think about what happened today. I was angry and I reacted badly. What you built on your own time is actually impressive, and I should have approached this differently. I'd like to discuss the possibility of Morrison engaging your consulting business as an external partner. We could structure something that would benefit both parties. Call me when you're ready to talk. I read his message 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of irony. The man who had fired me for having a side business was now interested in hiring that same business as a vendor. The skills he had accused me of stealing were now valuable enough that he wanted to purchase them legitimately. My phone rang. Sarah from Morrison. David, oh my God, are you okay? The whole office has been talking about what happened. I think I'm better than okay, I said, surprised by the truth in that statement. Marcus has been in his office with the door closed since you left. Word is that he called the regional director to discuss what happened, and apparently, it didn't go well for him. Jennifer from HR has been asking questions about Morrison's policies regarding employee side businesses, and there's talk about updating the handbook to be more flexible. The pieces were falling into place in ways I never could have anticipated. My forced departure from Morrison wasn't just opening doors I hadn't known existed. It was revealing that the door I had been so desperately trying to keep locked had actually been the thing holding me back. I started my car and pulled out of the parking garage, but instead of heading home, I found myself driving toward downtown, toward the co-working space where I had been meeting clients in the evenings and weekends. For the first time in 8 months, I could walk through those doors in broad daylight without looking over my shoulder or worrying about who might see me. As I drove through the city streets, I realized that Marcus had done me the biggest favor of my professional life. He had forced me to confront a question I had been avoiding. What was I really afraid of? I had been afraid of losing security, but my consulting business was generating more reliable income than my salary had ever provided. I had been afraid of losing professional credibility, but my reputation in the industry was actually stronger outside Morrison than within it. I had been afraid of losing structure and stability, but the flexibility and autonomy of running my own business had made me more creative and productive than I had ever been in a traditional office environment. Most importantly, I had been afraid of betting on myself. And Marcus, in his fury and sense of betrayal, had just forced me to make that bet. As I pulled into the co-working space parking lot, my phone buzzed with another message, this time from a potential client I had been courting for weeks. Heard you're now available for full-time projects. When can we schedule a meeting to discuss bringing you on as our lead strategist for the Q4 launch? I sat in my car, looking up at the building that was about to become my new office, and laughed out loud. For 8 months, I had been living 2 lives because I thought I needed both to survive. Turns out, I had only needed one. I just hadn't known which one it was until someone forced me to choose. 6 months later, I was sitting in a corner booth at Meridian, the upscale restaurant where Morrison and Associates traditionally held their client dinners, when I saw Marcus walk through the front door. He spotted me immediately, probably because I was exactly where I said I would be when I had called him that morning to arrange this meeting. The Marcus who approached my table looked different from the furious executive who had slammed his hand down and fired me. The rigid posture was gone, replaced by something that might have been humility. His usually perfect hair showed traces of gray I hadn't noticed before, and his smile seemed tentative, uncertain. "David," he said, extending his hand as he reached the table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Marcus," I replied, standing to shake his hand. "You sounded like you had something important to discuss." He settled into the booth across from me, and I noticed his hands weren't quite steady as he reached for his water glass. The confident executive who had once dominated every room he entered now seemed smaller somehow, more human. "I suppose you've heard about the changes at Morrison," he began. I had heard, of course. Industry gossip travels fast, and Morrison and Associates had been making headlines for all the wrong reasons over the past few months. 3 major clients had terminated their contracts, citing lack of innovation in digital strategy. The regional director who had been so impressed with Marcus's leadership had begun asking pointed questions about departmental performance. Most significantly, 2 more employees had been discovered running side businesses, leading to a company-wide policy review that had made Morrison look antiquated compared to their more progressive competitors. "I heard there have been some challenges," I said diplomatically. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Challenges? That's a polite way of putting it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "David, I made a mistake. A big one. Not just with you, but with my entire approach to managing talent." He pulled out his phone and showed me a LinkedIn article titled "The Side Hustle Revolution: Why Companies That Embrace Employee Entrepreneurship Are Winning." The byline made me do a double take. It was written by the same regional director who had been questioning Marcus's decisions. She interviewed 12 companies that actively encourage employees to maintain outside consulting practices, Marcus continued. Their employee retention is 40% higher than industry average. Their innovation metrics are off the charts. And their employees consistently rate higher in job satisfaction and professional development. I sipped my coffee, letting him continue. "The day after I fired you, I got a call from Jennifer Martinez. You know Jennifer, CEO of TechFlow, the startup you were consulting with?" I nodded. Jennifer had indeed called me that day, ultimately offering me the full-time position that had launched my new career. She wanted to discuss bringing Morrison on as their primary marketing agency for their Series A expansion. Potentially a 7-figure contract. Marcus's voice became quiet. "When I told her you were no longer with the company," she said, and I quote, "then we're no longer interested in Morrison." She told me that your strategic insights had been the primary reason she was considering us. The irony was almost too perfect. The client I had acquired through my side business, the work I had done that Marcus had seen as betrayal, would have been Morrison's biggest account of the year. "But that's not why I asked you here," Marcus continued. "I asked you here because I want to apologize. And because I have a proposition." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a formal contract proposal, but not the kind I expected. "Morrison and Associates wants to engage Chen Digital Strategy as our primary innovation consultant," he said. "Full autonomy, premium rates, and equity participation in any accounts you help us acquire. You'd essentially be running your own division within our larger structure." I read through the contract slowly. The terms were generous. More than generous. They were offering me nearly twice what my previous salary had been, plus performance bonuses, plus a percentage of new business revenue. Most importantly, they were offering me complete creative control and explicit permission to maintain my other consulting relationships. "It's a good offer," I said finally. "But," Marcus prompted, reading the hesitation in my voice. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. "But I don't need it anymore." Marcus's face fell. "David, I know I handled things badly, but—" "It's not about that," I interrupted gently. "Marcus, 6 months ago, this would have been a dream offer. The security, the resources, the recognition, everything I thought I wanted." I pulled out my own folder and opened it on the table between us. Inside were client testimonials, revenue reports, and growth projections for Chen Digital Strategy. I'm now working with 15 regular clients. My revenue last quarter was more than Morrison pays their senior partners. More importantly, I'm doing work that I'm passionate about, with complete creative freedom, on my own terms. Marcus studied the documents, his expression shifting from surprise to something that might have been respect. But the real reason I can't accept your offer, I continued, is that I'm not the same person who worked for Morrison 6 months ago. Getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to my career. I don't understand, Marcus said quietly. You forced me to bet on myself, I explained. For years, I had been playing it safe, keeping one foot in the traditional corporate world because I was afraid to fully commit to my own vision. When you fired me, you eliminated that safety net. And without the safety net, I discovered I could fly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the contract he had prepared so carefully. There's something else, I said. I want to offer you a position. His head snapped up. What? Chen Digital Strategy is expanding. I need someone with deep corporate experience to help manage client relationships and business development. Someone who understands both the traditional corporate mindset and the new entrepreneurial landscape. I smiled. The pay would be competitive with what you're making now, plus equity. And you'd have complete autonomy to consult with other agencies on the side. The look of shock on Marcus's face was worth every difficult moment of the past 6 months. You're offering me a job? He asked incredulously. I'm offering you a chance to bet on yourself, I said. Just like you forced me to do. As I walked out of Meridian that evening, leaving Marcus with a contract proposal of my own to consider, I reflected on the strange turns that life can take. The man who had fired me for having a secret business was now considering leaving his corporate position to join that same business. The side hustle that had cost me my job had become my career. The deception that had destroyed one professional relationship was building dozens of others. The moment I had thought was my biggest failure had actually been my greatest liberation. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. You just have to be willing to see the difference. 3 weeks later, Marcus submitted his resignation to Morrison & Associates and accepted my offer to become the Director of Client Relations at Chen Digital Strategy. Turns out, we both needed to learn the same lesson. The biggest risk isn't betting on yourself. The biggest risk is not betting on yourself at all.